The US government is calling for further pressure on North Korea over its latest nuclear test. Well, let's get straight into the details and cross to Caleb Maupin, who's in New York City. Caleb, what's been said?
Well, at this point, Washington, D.C. is talking tough when it comes to North Korea. However, there's a very different tone being taken by their allies in South Korea. At this point, the White House has come forward and that they have said that all measures of pressure are now being used against Pyongyang. Let's take a listen to what they said.
We've been clear about what our priorities are, that now is not the time for us to spend a lot of time focused on talking with North Korea, but putting all measures of pressure that we can, and we're going to continue through that process.
Now, at this point, Washington is deploying more military forces to the Korean Peninsula. According to the U.S. Navy, more troops and military hardware are on their way. Furthermore, we've heard from a U.S. Army commander who says basically that that this is what a response to what he's calling North Korea's self-destructive actions. However, we're hearing quite a different tone from the leaders of South Korea. At this point, the leaders of South Korea say that they're open to dialogue and that there are two types of dialogue they are interested in having with Pyongyang. First of all, they want to have dialogue about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and they want to have dialogue regarding the issue of stopping any threats and provocations from the North. But the second type of dialogue they would like to have is a humanitarian dialogue about meeting people's needs and taking care of the humanitarian situation on the peninsula. Quite an interesting tone. However, we're hearing something quite different from U.S. leaders. Now, it should be noted that Japan is also expressing an interest in peace and cooperation. We've just heard that the Japanese Prime Minister hopes that North Korea could be pressured to change aggressive policies with consolidated international efforts, and that Tokyo hopes that strengthening mutual trust in Japan and Russia relations will eventually result in the signing of a peace treaty. So we're hearing different calls for peace throughout Asia. We're hearing calls from China. We're hearing calls from Russia, from Japan, from the leaders of South Korea for dialogue. However, we are hearing this kind of talk of more military solutions, sending more troops and military hardware to South Korea coming from the United States. Now, South Korea and the USA are allies against North Korea, but they have very different tones when it comes to the Korea crisis. It's pretty clear, however, that if fighting were to break out, the people in South Korea have a lot more to lose than the folks in Washington, D.C.
New York City RT's Caleb Maupin, thank you. Well, Nazir Ahmed, a member of the UK's House of Lords, believes the US military presence in South Korea is proving counterproductive.
I think this is not going to help peace on the Korean Peninsula, because there really needs to be a diplomatic solution. I think President Putin is absolutely right, and I think Chinese are also looking for a diplomatic solution rather than raising tension militarily. Because the more we've seen in recent years, the more military threats or rhetoric that is coming out of Washington or South Korea, the response from the other side is not getting any weaker at all. And, you know, there are limited options that you can do. And when you see a country like North Korea with nuclear weapons and also weapons capable of carrying these huge bombs, then I think that diplomats need to find a solution rather than military.
The Russian president has said any further sanctions against North Korea over its nuclear program would prove useless. Vladimir Putin also warned that the ongoing escalation could trigger a, quote, global catastrophe. He was speaking to media at the annual BRICS summit in China, as Kate Partridge reports.
It was a very comprehensive post-summit conference by President Putin, but of course one of those key points was about North Korea. And North Korea, he drew a parallel with countries like Libya and Iraq, where regime change had been opposed upon them. And he believes that the North Korean people are looking at that particular example and fear that threat of regime change being imposed upon them. And he thinks that is the reason why that they're hanging on and they don't want to give up their nuclear tests.
Все хорошо помнят, что произошло.
Everyone remembers what happened to Iraq and Saddam Hussein. He stopped the production of weapons of mass destruction. Regardless, under the pretext of searching for those weapons, Saddam himself was destroyed, alongside his family members. And they remember that in North Korea. Do you think that just because of sanctions, North Korea will forget its policy of creating weapons of mass destruction? Russia condemns those North Korean actions. We think they are a provocation. North Koreans, as I told one of my colleagues yesterday, would rather eat grass than give up on their nuclear program, unless they feel safe.
President Putin was pointing out that the US response towards North Korea has been sanctions, and it seems lately as well with yet more sanctions. But President Putin was at pains to point out that he feels that this is a dead-end approach. He doesn't back the nuclearization of the peninsula. In fact, he and President Xi of China have been very much against it, saying that it was unacceptable. But he believes that North Korea will carry on regardless. They want the militarization, they want the nuclearization of the peninsula, and therefore they'll carry on regardless of sanctions. So President Putin thinks that's therefore it's a waste of time. He also finds it illogical whereby Russia and North Korea have been put on the same sanctions list before, and therefore it didn't work, and now the US is saying that they want Russia's help in trying to impose sanctions upon Pyongyang.
It's absurd to put Russia on the same sanctions list alongside North Korea, and then ask us to help impose sanctions against North Korea. The sanctions regime has hit a wall. It is not effective. But it is also to do with the humanitarian side of things. No matter what we do to North Korea's actions will not change, but millions of people will suffer.
President Putin reiterated his policy and that of President Xi as well, in that they believe the only way forward is through diplomacy and get around the negotiating table once again.
Russia's new ambassador to Washington told us world powers need to work together to resolve the crisis.
I cannot avoid mentioning North Korea. It's a great challenge for us, for the United States. We have to secure NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. And please don't forget that the United States is too far from North Korea, but North Korea is our neighbor. Frankly, I can't see any problem to deal with all outstanding issues with the United States.